It's Gretsch Day again. I frequently mention this, but things run in cycles, and every once in a while I find myself being presented with a bunch of the same instrument for no apparent reason. Got a Tennessean this time. This one is from 1967. It's got the classic Chet Atkins appointments, the most famous being the painted-on F-holes. I have to admit, that idea really turned me off for a long time. It just seemed so cheesy, you know? Either have holes or don't. Why fake it? When Gibson made their B.B. King Lucille model, he didn't want F-holes either. So they just left them out. Do those look weird? I don't think so. So why was this necessary? I guess the gut feeling was that people wouldn't go for a guitar that didn't have some kind of hole in it to let the sound out. We've mentioned before that Chet Atkins himself put forth the idea that having a sound hole in a hollow body electric instrument is kind of at odds with the concept because they can exacerbate feedback. And he took it even farther later on when he was helping to design his slimline electric classical models. Those are really kind of bizarre. You don't want coupling or sympathetic vibration in a hollow body instrument. This, of course, is a 6119. We worked on a very similar guitar a little over a year ago now, I believe. This model debuted in 1958 as a single pickup model, sort of the budget brand of the Chet Atkins line. Interesting, the single pickup was in the bridge position, which, you know, you don't often see that in an archtop style guitar. But they had it, and it gradually morphed into the two pickup arrangement, and eventually even got a dual cutaway. At this time they're outfitted with a couple of Hylotron pickups. They're humbuckers. The body is laminated maple. The finish is a kind of walnut stain. They seem to fade to varying degrees depending on how much UV exposure they've had. This one has mellowed out to a kind of caramel color, which is very nice if you like brown. The electronics package is very much the same as in that 6120 we saw a few weeks back. Got your master volume, two more volumes, one for each pickup. There's the standard pickup selector switch. There's a dark circuit switch with the preset muffled woolly sounds. There's no other adjustable tone control. This one, however, also has the standby switch, which very few people ever use, and consequently, if it ever does get knocked into standby mode, they wonder what went wrong with their guitar. It stopped making sound all of a sudden. It all cut out. Why do they have this as well as the master volume? Just because. This one still has its little metallic nameplate. It hasn't been covered with a giant eagle sticker or had extra tuner holes bored into it at strange locations like the last 6119 we dealt with. Overall, this thing is in really nice shape. Gretsch, of course, during this period is renowned for having problems with the binding, celluloid rot. And you see there's a little patch starting up next to the 0 fret here. Even the frets are really clean, but there's an issue, and that is the owner has a nickel allergy. And playing standard frets made of 18% nickel silver can cause an outbreak of eczema, or eczema, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So that's no fun. I've been tasked with removing these frets and replacing them with stainless steel. Oh no, what about the originality? Well, the owner wants to play it, and it's his decision. And these things, just by the way, even though they're vintage, hover around maybe 60% of the value of a brand new Les Paul in the box. Why is that? Because 1967 is the dividing year when Gretsch was sold and moved under the banner of the Baldwin Piano Company. This is akin to Gibson being purchased by Norlin around the same time. There was a perceived drop in quality. 2 years can make a huge difference, like $5,000 in the value for the exact same model of guitar. It's the same reason you pay a huge premium for the one built in the same year as George Harrison's, the one he played on the Ed Sullivan Show. Even though we don't know what year that was. It could be 62, 63. Anyway, you're going to pay more because George had one. It's all about perception. And this guitar, actually, according to the serial number, was made just before the company was handed over. But because it's a 67, it's worth less no matter what. I don't know. I try not to think about these things. There's a vintage Bigsby tailpiece, of course, so much a part of the charm of these guitars. And the original rocker style bridge, this is really nothing more than a cylindrical bar, and it's designed to rock back and forth with use. Is it going to intonate perfectly? You might be surprised at how close it comes. If you wanted to switch it out, I mean, you don't want to use like a standard ABR style bridge because they'll saw right through pretty quickly. A roller bridge might be the way to go. What's the string spacing on this? It's like probably like 2 1/8, maybe 2 1/16 ish. So yeah, I guess you could get one of those standard roller bridges with an adjustable spacing and use that if you were so inclined, or you can just learn to live with this, which is what people used to do. Action. It's no shredder. 4.5 to almost 5/64 on the bass side, 5/64 on the treble. Might try and take that down a little bit if there's room left on the bridge. There is. Again, we've got these distinctive Van Gent tuners. I like the look of those. This may have had some neck reset work done, which is not that uncommon for these as well. Over time, the usable neck angle can disappear. And this piece here frequently ends up with a celluloid rot. It's starting. I'm going to try and impregnate this with some thin super glue. Are these the original frets? If they are, they've been dressed and recrowned pretty carefully. It is possible to do a refret where we try and retain the nibs in the binding. These are like Gibsons in that way. It's a very exacting process. It takes a lot of time measuring each and every fret. I've got to make a jig that replicates the radius of the board so I can press the fret down in there, use dial calipers to get the length just right so that it's going to slide in perfectly, because you don't want a gap between the end of the fret and the nib, so the string will get caught in there. So consequently, that costs a lot of money. It's usually reserved for guitars in the price range of a new car or up. Really pristine collector's examples, which is always a bit of a head shaker, right? Because if a guitar is that valuable as a collector's item, but it needs new frets, is it going to be played? Shouldn't it just be preserved in a museum-like setting? Again, it's like owning a working Stutz Bearcat and pretending it's going to be your daily driver, when in reality you'll strum it gently without depressing the strings for 2 minutes each year on your birthday. The string's off. I want to find a way to sort of isolate the Bigsby and keep it from flopping around too much, because this is a huge chunk of metal that can do a lot of damage. Yes, there we go. That's pretty cool. You can see how much it's faded over time. That's kind of amazing. But yeah, I don't want this flopping. Judgment call. I looked at this finish, and this finish is actually in really good shape. I feel reasonably safe using this low-tack painter's tape. I think it'll be okay. So do this. I'm just going to impregnate these areas in the binding that are starting to deteriorate with thin super glue. There is some anecdotal evidence that this can slow down the effects of off-gassing plasticizer. I'm using very thin super glue, obviously. Directing it at the cracks. There is some merit to the idea of replacing the binding at the same time as the refret, but as these things go, it's really not in bad shape at this point. So we try and preserve the originality when possible, right? Let's pull these frets out. It's fun and informative. Also, let's measure these for height. Ooh, low. Yeah, 20 thousandths. As I've mentioned before, anything under 30 and people start to get cranky. That one is 16 thousandths, so it's time. And like usual, I'm going to score gently along the side of each fret. This helps break up the schmutz that's in there, but it also provides a breaking place for the wood fibers. As the fret is being pulled up, there are barbs on the sides of the tang, which really, they want to do some damage sometimes. This provides a place for the splits to stop, so they don't go off into the portion of the wood which is visible. Time for the soothing warmth of a soldering iron. This is a standard soldering iron. I have taken the tip and I have ground it into a slightly concave form so that it rests upon the fret, even a low one like this, and won't slide off and make burn marks. This is a 25 watt iron. Okay, I can smell the gunk, and you can see there is some liquefaction happening there. So we shall get the fret puller starting at the very end, a series of gentle chomps. And that is coming up fairly cleanly, which is what we like. Rosewood in general tends to come out easier than ebony. Ebony is more chip prone. And there we go. Fairly standard wire. Looking at this closely, it seems like someone has filed down the barbs on the tang a little bit. They're slightly flattened. It's good information to know and maybe think about, consider, ponder even. I think the main thing is just don't rush. You know, you got to be really gentle and don't yank. No yanking. I'm going to do my very best to preserve the ancient patina on this board. There's very little grooving. It's just got that weathered old rosewood surface that some people like. I'm not going to round over the surface where the nibs were. I'm going to preserve a little flat spot there, which will act as a support surface for the ends of the frets. It'll result in a much more uniform look. I need to clean out the slots using a little tool that's accurately sized for the wire that I use. Just make sure there's not any gunk in the bottom of the slots and that they're the proper depth. I'll adjust the truss rod so the surface of the board is as straight as I can make it. After thinking about it, I'm going to remove this 0 fret because it's about 9 thousandths lower than the new wire that's going in, and there's virtually no way it's going to be, functional. And it'll allow me clear access to replace this area of damaged binding. Ordinarily, I'd probably want to do a scarf joint or an angled surface to glue the binding together, but in this case, because it's vintage and already has a whole bunch of vertical cracks through it, doing it this way is probably going to look more authentic. You can see the texture. It's very crumbly. This feels like dentistry somehow. It really does. It feels like debridement, or looking for margins in a biopsy around a mass or something. At a certain point, it stops feeling like chalk and starts to feel like plastic again. Like you get back to the good stuff. Okay, I'm going to bond this with super glue. And I need to rough up the surfaces pretty well. And just scratching it with my knife. 80 grit sandpaper works as well. Little thick viscosity super glue. While the glue cures, I'll cut the frets to length. No, I didn't puncture myself on fret wire. That was a nurse who probably had a tough time in phlebotomy class, because it took her a while. She didn't know that penetration is paramount. Gonna make a little snoop for the overhang. The vintage StewMac nippers here actually work fine on stainless if it's in the smaller dimensions. Like this is a vintage style wire. They're not so great on jumbos. I'll scrape the new binding level with the old. I've got some tape on my razor blade to act as a depth stop and prevent me from cutting into the finish. Just a little bit of thin CA glue to seal things up along the margins. And I'll sand lightly with some 600, 1200, 2400, 3600, 4000, 6000. It's my standard hybrid fretting procedure. I knock things in place using my plastic-headed mallet. Slide things out of the way, grab my fret press jaws. After cleaning some of the fish glue squeeze out so it doesn't get loaded up on the little brass jaw that's part of the press, and give it a squeeze. For the area over the fingerboard extension where I don't want to have to pound with the mighty strength of Thor, I've filed the barbs a bit to decrease the amount of pressure it takes to seat the fret. Obviously there's a happy zone where it seats easily but it doesn't come up again. And as usual, because this is stainless, it takes longer to do this work. So I feel confident in the glue's ability to hold the fret in place. I just wanted to, not take quite as much of a pounding. Stainless also, it's not as malleable. It'll bounce back if you don't have an accurate radius bent into the wire. So you got to be pretty careful about that. But other than that, it's quite similar to using a standard fret wire. And of course you also make a visual check to make sure that things are seated all the way across. Snippity snip. As always, because it's stainless steel, everything takes longer. Both sanding and leveling and crowning, the whole thing. And of course, polishing. I'm going to use some slightly taller wire, also stainless, for the 0 fret. Theoretically, you should be able to get away with exactly the same height as the other wire. Oftentimes, though, you can't, for varying reasons. If it's a little taller, I can dress it down. Here's a look at the base on that rocker bridge. You can see that the adjustment posts have a radius milled into the base of them that fits in a little cup here and allows it to rock. It's not intended to be stable. So I'm going to put on some Ernie Ball custom 10-46 stainless strings. I need to take the height down on the 0 fret just a little bit. It's about 5 thousandths too tall. The fret itself is about 9 thousandths taller than what's on the rest of the board. It's actually pretty good on the high E. That's not bad. You have to remember that there's some tendency for these strings to wear in fairly quickly. They'll dig a little groove for themselves. Not nearly as fast in stainless as they will in nickel, but I want to get them a little bit closer than they are. So I'll take a measurement with the tape in place here, and yeah, around 48 thousandths. Slightly higher in the center. 48 thousandths. Okay, so I don't want to take off too much, obviously, because that would be a real bummer. Got to recrown it, otherwise the takeoff point is going to be too far backwards towards the headstock. Nice. This is around 21 thousandths. Right, we're set up, and I'm going to be honest, we're just barely getting away with it at an action height of 5/64 on the bass, 4.5 on the treble. Keep in mind, the strings are now actually 20 thousandths or a half a millimeter farther away from the fretboard now with the taller frets installed. Thing is, the Bigsby, this is one that's designed for use on arch tops. It doesn't have the second forward bar to increase the string angle. What would be a B3 B6 maybe. And as the strings are, it's almost a straight line to the bridge. There's not a lot of downward pressure there, and there's some pingy vibrations I'm not really wild about. It functions just barely. I mentioned before that it looks like someone did a neck reset on this, and if that's the case, they didn't go far enough, or the neck has come forward since. There is one tiny little thing I'm going to do to wring out every last bit of break angle, and that is to replace the felt pads that sit between the Bigsby and the top. I happen to have some felt that's a little bit thinner, and that might gain us another 0.5 millimeter or something. I don't mind the action as it is, but if you wanted it lower and you didn't want to shell out for another neck reset, which is not cheap on these, you could give up the functional Bigsby and just string it underhand. That would give you plenty of break angle, but depressing the arm would then give you the opposite effect to what you're expecting. You know, it would raise the pitch, which might be an interesting effect, but, you know, don't play wicked game. So the old felt is somewhere around 60 to 70 thousandths, and this new stuff is probably around 30 thousandths, so it's about half the thickness. Okay, set up as good as I can make it. I've mentioned this before, there is a minimum break angle that a guitar will function at, and it's around 6 degrees. In this case, we're at about 4.5 on average. So, you know, you'll get something like this. These strings, there's just not quite enough downward pressure. You know, that is about 1 millimeter. And I figure, you know, this is the kind of thing, if you're going to be a Gretsch person, you got to know this stuff, really. You got to know about the binding, and you know about the setup issues. Because there are lots of too good to be true Gretsch deals out there, and it's not like you're saving money, it's just they're passing on the repair costs to you. So, just, you know, they're fantastic instruments. They have a very distinctive vibe, but they also have their own idiosyncrasies. So if you're going to go for the old ones, the new stuff, rather inexpensive Gretsches out there now, fantastic guitars. These things, you gotta want to play them, because they can be buggy. The pickups seem pretty anemic. Yeah, finger picking I can feel, especially the middle strings popping out of their grooves.